So anyway, so that was the first portion of the pre-primary edition. That was New York State Attorney General candidate Tish James. So you've heard from two of the Democratic candidates. Last week you heard from Licia Eve, and like I did with her, I will break this up into just her portion of the show and post it on Black Westchester so you can hear her from beginning to end, and she can share it with her people and everything and all that good stuff. And I will do that with the other two candidates. The senator should be on her way soon if she's not outside.
No, she got 10 minutes.
So, Bob,
Yes.
What have you been up to? You didn't do the intro with us. What you been up to? What you work on? You're
well-
always working on something. I know you're back to school, but classes
Yes.
start. So
I'm back to school. Classes have started, but as you know, outside of the classroom, essentially, I've been continuing on the secret project that I've been working on, a kind of web platform we've discussed
okay.
that I'm hoping to launch soon.
As soon as you're ready to talk about it,
Yes.
talk about it here.
Yeah, so
Yeah, yeah.
that's basically it. And you know, in addition, getting myself prepared for the election season, I'm a big proponent of citizen activism. I think that if there's going to be a turnaround, it's got to start with us. It's not simply a matter of having good candidates, but also people putting boots on the ground, hands on voting levers, and so I'm always trying to do my best to, you know, try to mobilize and energize people to get out into the polls in other ways.
So while we're in between guests, now I watched Obama, former President Barack Obama has spoke at least twice. Once in Chicago and once at, was it Disney World or in California, somewhere near
Okay.
Disney World. Told an interesting story about Disney World. But I know he, in the 2008, 2012 elections, right, he managed to galvanize the vote for himself. But the midterm elections of 2010 and 2014, or was it 2014, right? And 2010, he wasn't able to galvanize the votes for others as well. The turnout was considerably less. And now he's on the campaign trail now. Of course, the Republicans, Trump and the Republicans, will use that to galvanize their, which they're pretty loyal to him. Do you think? What do you think his involvement will help? Will it help, hurt, or will it galvanize the?
Let me start my answer by noting that it's very unusual and a sort of break with the tacit
Absolutely.
tradition for a former president to criticize a sitting president.
His sitting successor.
Yes. Very unusual. However, I think former President Obama rightly recognizes that this is a very unusual presidency, a time in history that we're living through, and unfortunately, he has concluded, and I agree wholeheartedly, that the Trump presidency represents an existential threat to the democratic order here in the United States and across the globe. So much of the conduct of President Trump has been diametrically opposed to our long-standing democratic traditions, from respect for freedom of the press, separation of powers, the rule of law, non-interference in criminal investigations, especially ones that target the president himself, and also a rising tide of white supremacy that President Trump's rhetoric continues to energize. And in that sense, I think President Obama is absolutely right that he can not afford to sit on the sideline. We are in a national emergency. Will he? What will be the outcome? Because I agree with you that it will not only mobilize Democratic voters, but also mobilize Republican voters who feel that this is unfair to President Trump. You know, in the end, I really do think this, and I guess this is wishful thinking, perhaps,
Right.
that the Democratic forces will prevail in the midterm election. I think this is much bigger than partisan politics and mere differences in policy, but rather whether or not we are going to continue to persist as a democratic republic. So I'm hoping and praying that in the end, President Obama's intervention in the campaign will make a difference. But I also have to note that there are many Republicans of impeccable credentials who have likewise called on all voters, whether they be Republican, Democratic, or Independent, to send a clear and unambiguous message to the Republican Party leadership with their disappointment with the behavior of President Trump and the failure of the Republican leadership to really stand up four square for our democratic traditions with a small d. And in that sense, I really do believe that the univocal cry, the single cry that's being sounded by all quarters about the danger that President Trump's presidency represents, I think it may well make the difference and may at least save the semblance of democracy that we have in a day of corporate dominance.
Now, I'll read Sean Patterson's comment, and then I have another question about the Senator Booker in the Kavanaugh hearings. Sean Patterson Howard said, let me bring that up. You have to have great candidates out there who are, capital letters, really saying something. You can't just rally people around what we don't like, but also have a clear vision as to what needs to be done to change the problem. And the same thing needs to be done on a local level as well, even more so. Now, I wanted to move on to one of the things we saw was the Supreme Court Justice hearings for Mr. Kavanaugh, and we saw a break from tradition on something that was never done before, where New Jersey Senator Cory Booker felt that certain documents that were being held that had no national security risk or anything, but were being held, they had information that the public needed to see. And even though they were not to release them, he went against, I guess, the law, actually, and that they passed.
Senate rules.
And the Senate rules, and he released it knowing that they could possibly boot him from the Senate. I wanted you to speak on it was that, but we do while it was a bold move, some have just said, he's planning to run for, I guess, president or something. He's planning to run for something soon, and that was just that's why he did it. So I just wanted to know if any thoughts you had, any clarity you can bring to that situation.
There's been a lot of deeply troubling questions raised about the nomination of Brett Kavanaugh for a Supreme Court justice.
Thanks, because I couldn't even think of his first name to save my life. Yeah.
It's not many people are aware of this, but there are some rather incestuous ties between Brett Kavanaugh, the Supreme Court justice who he may well replace, Anthony Kennedy, and also Anthony Kennedy's son, who served as a high-ranking member of Deutsche Bank when it was making loans to the Trump Foundation. Not much discussed, however, for some commentators it has raised questions as to whether or not there was some sort of quid pro quo and whether an agreement had been struck behind the scenes regarding Supreme Court Justice Kennedy's retirement. Many feel that the fix is in. It's compounded by the fact that the Republican majority in the Senate has seemed to use a lot of subterfuge in order to shield, some tricks in order to shield the public from full knowledge of Brett Kavanaugh's legal record, both during his time in the Bush presidency, if I'm not mistaken. I've had an opportunity to read some of the emails, and the basic issue is that, from what I understand, because I actually did watch some of the hearings, I happen to like watching C-SPAN and watching the hearings, and so I did have an opportunity.
I watch it too.
Yes, to get a full discussion of some of the issues that were raised, and essentially the exchange between Senator Booker, Senator Harris, Senator Klobuchar, and other senators who sit on the Judiciary Committee was that the decision to designate some of Brett Kavanaugh's communications in his previous position was in fact done unilaterally, and itself was a break with the normal traditions, which would have required some sort of bipartisan agreement about the process for designating records confidential, and therefore was thought to be a kind of underhanded tactic to prevent this information from coming to light. And a lot of it, to be honest, I think is quite damning and very troubling.
Action on, what was one part of it was affirmative action, I guess. Part of it was, what was the other part?
There's some of the position on whether or not Roe v. Wade was a settled matter.
Right.
Although Kavanaugh has expressed that he would follow the judicial policy of stare decisis, which is a fancy way of saying you're going to respect the previous legal precedents that have been enacted or voiced by the Supreme Court from previous decisions. In public, he said he would respect stare decisis. However, in private, in some of his exchanges and some of his appearances in public fora, he has made the case that Roe v. Wade is not settled law, and that should be deeply troubling, especially in other
especially since the president
on
the campaign trail, Trump said, he's going to have the opportunity to put some justices in there, and they're going to get rid of Roe v. I mean, he said that on the campaign trail, like that's
right.
So it wouldn't be too far to assume that he picked this candidate for a reason,
And what other commentators have noted is just recently the Supreme Court, after the nomination of Gorsuch, who was President Trump's first selection, that after a year-long filibuster, essentially, of Justice Garlick, who was Barack Obama's nomination for the Supreme Court, they overturned a long-standing precedent that ensured union rights when they issued the Janus decision,
right,
which essentially upended established legal precedent about union rules and whether or not employees should whether or not unions should serve as the representatives for all employees in a shop.
So what do you think? So I don't know if you spoke to speaking specifically of Cory Booker's actions. What was your thoughts on that when you?
While it was unusual, again, I think we live in unusual times, and it calls for unusual, maybe unseen, unprecedented actions. And so far as, I don't think it was fair, so far as I know. The procedures I don't think were fair. I think the attempt to, shield the public from knowing Kavanaugh's record really is itself anti-democratic, and in that sense, I'm fully in support.
And it was what was interesting was when the other Democratic congressmen, they stood in support.
Right.
One in particular said, "You know what? And whatever punishment or whatever is coming down the pipe, add my name to that list." And then another one,
right,
the other one from Hawaii, I think she was from Hawaii. She released some more documents.
I think Senator Hirano.
Yeah, she released some more documents, and they basically rallied that if you're gonna charge one of us, you're gonna have to charge everybody.
And I think the Democratic base is insistent that our leadership, Democratic representatives, really stand up to the unconventional tactics that Republican senators and congresspersons continue to use to kind of thwart the affair and democratic process, with a small d, of reaching important decisions that affect the well-being of all of the nation, including the right of women to exercise reproductive freedom. I have to say, I don't think that there are more serious, more painful moral choices that a woman who has an unwanted pregnancy will have to face, but whether or not to terminate a pregnancy. And I don't think anyone is going to be at greater pains in making that decision and will go through more anguish than a woman herself. And I, in the end, think that we have to leave it in the hands of women who have demonstrated a commitment to life in ways that many of their male counterparts seem to be obtuse to. You know, I think it's the height of hypocrisy that Republicans continue to harp on their support for life, the right to life and support of the unborn, and yet all of their policies represent a frontal attack on the living, those who must make a way under immense hardship that their policies continue to impose upon us. And if I'm going to turn to anyone for solid moral guidance and compass, I'm going to put my faith in my fellow women. I know that this is not a decision that will be made lightly.